So the Gossip Girl reboot really did have the potential to be absolutely brilliant, and quite frankly really should have been, especially as the original show was such a masterpiece, and so the reboot should have been a slam dunk, especially as it wasn't a brand new reinterpretation. If anything, it was part of the same world, so like I said, just could have been absolutely brilliant, but it's just such a shame that season 2 just did not live up to its potential. What is up, everybody? Welcome back to my channel, Lifestyle Critic. I hope you're having a brilliant day. So in this video, we are going to be reviewing and breaking down the second season of Gossip Girl the Reboot. Now, I really wanted to love this show. I really did. As like I said, the original was just such a phenomenal show. But for whatever reason, all of the decisions that they made from a creative perspective on this rebooted interpretation was just not that great. I mean, it just wasn't fun, it just wasn't scandalous, and the group of characters just weren't that great. And if anything, from a scripting narrative point of view, they were just constantly learning lessons, and it just wasn't fun. It didn't have the pizzazz that the original show did. Now, it did definitely have its moments, and you know, it was really cool to be part of this world once again. But like I said in the intro, they just could have just done so much more to make it an absolutely epic, truly unmissable show, especially as it's on HBO Max, and HBO is renowned for having such brilliant shows, such awesome script writing. So this show really should have been absolutely brilliant, but it just wasn't, and I'm going to be breaking it all down for you in this series review. So there are 5 main storylines that I wanted to go over in this section, but don't worry, I will go through every single character's individual storyline in the character section. Now, the first one is all of the high school power play. So I actually really liked it in the beginning of this season when Monet was so determined to be the new queen bee at high school, as she felt, you know, I have invested so much of my time trying to make Julian the new queen bee, and she just doesn't respect it, she doesn't use the power that she has got, and she actually feels that she will be a better version of the queen bee of the high school. So I thought, you know, from a characterization perspective, this was a really good storyline, and I loved how they had the new versions of Blair and Serena as her little minions. So, you know, that storyline was really good, but it was just over so quickly. And like I said, in terms of the characters just constantly learning lessons, Monet was learning a lesson of, you know, friendship is better than this, and that she can do this with Julian, but then that just kind of disappeared. She then became cancelled as the series was progressing, and then she just kind of disappeared, which was just such a travesty, as Monet had the potential of really being the new Blair Waldorf, and maybe if they had gone down that direction, the storylines could have been even better. What I did think was interesting this season is that they gave a much bigger focus to the parents, and I thought that was really good actually, as some of the high school shows, for example 90210, the reboot, as well as Riverdale, do a really good job in terms of balancing high school type storylines as well as parent-based storylines. So it was really interesting how this season they focus on it a lot more, and I do think the parents are actually really interesting. The DeHaans, for example, are a true ruthless family. So firstly, you can see where Monet gets it from, but also you can see the challenges that Monet has in terms of being part of this really high achieving family who have unrealistic standards and expectations. So the pressure that is on Monet as a result of this was interesting. And also the DeHaans are really manipulative in using Gossip Girl and using a lot of other people for their own selfish, nefarious purposes. So like I said, the DeHaans were a true threat in this series. The Lots, I feel like they were the true victims, very similar to the Humphreys from the original series in terms of trying to succeed in the right way while just stuck in this really difficult world. So I thought the Lots were really good. The Hopes, I mean, you only really saw Kiki Hope trying to be a nice guy in this really difficult world, and I loved how they also brought in Eleanor from the original series with that storyline. That was really cool. But I did always feel really sad for Kiki Hope, just in terms of all of the difficulties that she has to go through. And then we have the Bergmans, the true definition of a European ruthless family. And although it was really interesting how Obi is a nice guy and was misled and manipulated again by his sister, as she knew that Obi is a bit of a knight in shining armor, so created a situation in which his mother is perceived to be the big bad wolf, but then actually his sister was the one that was behind it all along. So I thought, you know, the parents-based storylines was pretty interesting. The next big storyline is of course to do with Audrey, Aki and Max. In the first season, they were a bit of a threesome that were hooking up all the time, and they have transitioned into a fully fledged couple in this season. And across the entire season, it was just all the relationship challenges that these three individuals have. First of all, of course, Audrey and Aki just don't really know what this means for the relationship, as they've only known it to be them two for so long. And Max just became a bit of a completely different character, as they just removed all of the brilliant edginess that this guy had, as he was a little bit like Chuck Bass in the first season. And he was just always just being a little bit of a wet blanket in terms of chasing after these guys all the time. But I did think it was really sad. By the end of it, they were showing that Audrey and Aki are just focusing on themselves, but they deleted some scenes from the final episode, which was going to show that Audrey was missing Max. So in the third season, of course, they would have maybe gotten back together. The next storyline I wanted to talk about is, of course, tapping into the world of the original, as we are still in that universe. So it was really, really cool, you know, how Georgina Sparks was referencing the fact that Dan and Serena are still together. Of course, Chuck and Blair referencing their romance in the final episode. And just having Georgina back was so good. And it really did show, you know, how much of a chaotic character she was, and how she really did bring the drama, bring the energy, bring the jaw-dropping moments. And if anything, I feel like if Georgina was here across the entire season, it would have just been 10 million times better. And the final storyline that I wanted to talk about, ironically, incidentally, did mirror the final season and the final couple of episodes from the original show, in terms of all of the characters coming together and rivaling Gigi and trying to find out Gossip Girl's real identity. And I thought it was really fitting and really, really cool how they were actually at the true Met Gala, which I thought was really, really impressive. And Kate Keller, I feel like it wasn't true to her character in terms of how I just wanted to sell her story and trying to make loads of money. Although I do think it's only right for her to have true comeuppance for all of the chaos that she was causing and creating, even though I do think she could have pushed it even more. But you know, that final showdown was a nice way to wrap up the entire series. And now let's look at season 2 as a whole and first focus on the positive. So like I said, it is really, really cool that it is extending the world of the original. It is a shame that we never got to see the core 6 group of characters, as if we did, it would have been absolutely incredible. But you know, it was nonetheless great to see Eleanor Waldorf here. Of course, Cyrus was mentioned, Serena and Dan were mentioned, Blair and Chuck were mentioned, and we got to see Georgina. Eric was mentioned, but we did get to see Jonathan. So you know, it was really, really cool to have a bit of an extended universe from the original series. It is interesting to have a modern lens into this world and see modern challenges that these characters are going through, even though I don't think they were done that well. And even though it wasn't that beloved, it was really interesting to have a different dynamic in terms of the teachers being Gossip Girl and to see the thought process that goes into creating an account like this. However, from a negative point of view, like I said, this series unfortunately was just sapped of all the fun, the pizzazz, the energy, and just the cool factor that the original show had just was so absent in this interpretation, unfortunately. And there just weren't that many juicy storylines, that many brilliant secondary characters. The original show just had so many legendary supporting characters, and even though it was interesting to see the teacher's thought process in creating Gossip Girl, I feel like that just sucked away so much time that the original series just didn't have to bother with that, and Gossip Girl was just this fictitious presence that was just causing them so much chaos and anarchy, and was just so devilish in terms of all of the chaos that it was causing for these group of characters. And so whilst it was interesting and different to see the conflict that the teachers are going through, the tension that it was causing just wasn't that great. And ultimately, I just feel like some of the storylines were a little bit boring. And this group of characters were just constantly learning lessons instead of just having brilliant storylines. And so from a storyline perspective, whilst it definitely did have its moments, I just feel like they could have and should have just made it so much better. So the Gossip Girl reboot is of course cancelled, but there are some threads that they left open-ended by the end of this series, and the showrunner Josh Safran was interviewed and revealed what was going to take place in season 3. So let's deep dive into it. So firstly, the character that Zoya was speaking to was actually going to be talking to all of the different characters and was going to be central to the mystery in the next season. So you didn't see him, but he was also going to be the character that spoke to Max and was also going to speak to Audrey and was also going to speak to Obi and Julian. So that would have been really interesting in terms of seeing what is this guy doing with this particular friendship group. And the way in which he would have spoken to Audrey is when she would be looking at a picture and would be thinking back to Max. So of course, they would have revisited the threesome storyline in terms of Aki, Audrey and Max, and I'm sure they would have just gotten back together. I'm sure they would have had a couple more relationship challenges, but maybe they would have shown that actually you can make this kind of a relationship work in this modern age. The woman that Julian was speaking to would have actually been her mother's sister, so it wouldn't have been, oh, you know, your mum has been alive all this time. they would have continued with the fact that, unfortunately that character has passed away. But it would have been interesting as Julian is trying to find out all about the past. And of course, this involves Zoya as well, but she is keeping Zoya out of it. So I'm sure it would have been a lot more tension being created between her and Zoya once again. And as we did see in all of the posters, of course, Luna has become a big deal now. So she has become a true superstar and was always helping all of the other characters, in particular Julian and Monet. So it would have been interesting as Josh confirmed that Julian and Monet would have been really resentful over the fact that, Luna has just become stratospheric and has not only become a big deal in their Constance High School, not only in New York, but actually all across the world. And of course, Monet has just been so desperate to have something like this. So it would have been really interesting, but I'm sure at the end of it, like they do with this entire series, they would have all just learned loads of lessons and they would have focused on their friendship over all of this other stuff. And as we saw in that post-credit scene, Jordan is now being encouraged to turn Gossip Girl into an app. So it would have democratized Gossip Girl as a device and it wouldn't have been a single person leading it. If anything, everybody can now become Gossip Girl via this app. And maybe they would have borrowed some infrastructure from Reddit in terms of certain storylines. You can upvote it and downvote it. And this is how everybody realizes what are going to be the big storylines, who are going to be the big players. So instead of focusing on Kate becoming Gossip Girl, maybe we would have focused on Jordan instead, having a lot of conflict in terms of creating this awful, crazy app. And hopefully we would have seen loads more cameos, as it was really great to see Jonathan, but the original plan was to have Eric and Jonathan, and maybe in the third season they would have been able to convince more of the core six to maybe make an appearance. As like I said, Georgina was just absolutely brilliant, and maybe some of the legacy characters could have become regulars, which would have been really, really good, but we'll never see season 3, but maybe one day we'll get another reboot. So I'm really mixed with the cast and characters of this reboot, as some of them were really, really good, but the others, annoyingly, just really pulled down this show. So let's go through them one by one. So Julian I thought was okay. If anything, I thought she was a really annoying lead. And I feel like she really did pull down this show. In the first season, she was so much better, as she is the most followed person in Constance High School and wants to use her power for good reasons, but at the same time is really conflicted because she wants to be a successful influencer. But in the second season, they just made this character really, really annoying. And she just wasn't that great of a lead character. She just wants to be really good all the time and just always has good intentions, but just for whatever reason just messes things up a lot for herself and for her friends, which was interesting to see, but I don't think she was that great of a lead, unfortunately. I have similar thoughts to Zoya as well, as in the first season, I loved it. I thought she was really, really good, as she had a lot of Dan Humphrey and Jenny Humphrey energy, and it was just really, really interesting in terms of seeing this character trying to break into the popular group. So I feel like Zoya and Julian were much better leads in the first season, but they just weren't able to carry it into this season, unfortunately. But out of the two of them, I do think Zoya is stronger. Firstly, from an acting point of view, as I just couldn't stand watching the actress who was playing Julian, as I feel like Whitney Peak is a miles better actress than Jordan Alexander. I would have loved it if they had maintained and continued that Dan and Jenny energy with this character, but she did have some interesting storylines. For example, having to go to Monet to try to help her with the whole sex tape stuff, especially when she was using Monet's name. And that really did mirror, actually, the whole Jenny Blair scenario. Emily, Alyn, Lind really should have been the lead of this show. I know they didn't want to do that, as of course they wanted to focus on diversity, which was really, really good and really, really important. But I feel like Emily, Alyn, Lind just would have been so much better. Firstly, she looked so much like Blair Waldorf, and I thought it was so brilliant when you finally had pitted her against Julian, as then these two characters were really, really interesting, as you could just see how much ferocious energy this character had, and she was always one step ahead of Julian, was always scheming, and I thought this show is finally becoming amazing and embracing what it means to be a Gossip Girl reboot. But then they quickly moved Audrey away from that storyline and then just continued to have her with Aki and Max, which was okay, but they firstly just dragged that storyline out so much. And I just don't know why they just didn't give Audrey more better storyline material, as clearly this actress firstly is really competent, as she is a Hollywood actress that is really, really successful. And also, they have also just demonstrated that from a characterization point of view, she just could have held this show up so much better. Obi was a really interesting character. I feel like he was on his own away from the group for a long time. First of all of his storylines with Grace, and then trying desperately to take down his mother, and then working with his sister, and then being stitched up by his sister, as of course his sister just planned the whole thing so that she could take over the company. And Obi was really interesting also when he was working with Gossip Girl, but as a character, I just feel like he was a little bit of a wet blanket, and I feel like they should have just added a bit more edge to him to try to make him a much cooler character, as then you could have really cared for him and really rooted for him, as if anything, in the current characterization perspective, he was just a true wet blanket and just really vanilla as a result. Like I said earlier, I loved Monet. I thought she was a brilliant character, and I love the fact that she made her so much more prominent this season, and she really did have so much Blair Waldorf energy. And I loved it, like I said before as well, how they really did deep dive into the challenges that she has in terms of having an impossible high level of standards that her parents are expecting, especially as they are super successful, and her mother was just a true villain in this series. And you can really see where Monet gets it from. If anything, I just would have wanted to see more from this character, as she just had the potential to be absolutely brilliant. And I feel like if her and Audrey were leading this show instead of Julian and Zoya, it could have been so much more successful. Luna, similarly, was absolutely brilliant. I am so annoyed that they just didn't really give her that many storyline opportunities, as the one involving her and her mother was so good. In terms of her mother is just so self-obsessed, she didn't really want her daughter, and if anything as well, she didn't want her daughter just constantly being in her face, reminding her of her getting old, and always wanted to focus on her career and just fully focusing on herself. So when her and Luna are facing each other, I just thought it was absolutely incredible. And the way in which Luna just has so much self-love, and the way in which she just pushes a lot of people away, but the guys that are able to step above this are the ones that are going to be successful in terms of grabbing her attention. So I feel like Luna was really, really good. And she was the voice of reasoning with pretty much the entire friendship group. And like I said, in season 3, she would have been so much more prominent. So I'm really annoyed that we're not going to see season 3, as like I said, Luna just could have absolutely owned it. Max was a true shell of his former self. In season 1, I loved this guy. I thought he was really, really cool. He had such good bravado energy and just didn't really give a damn about anyone or anything. Whereas this time, similarly to Obi, he just became a bit of a wet blanket and was just constantly chasing after Aki and Audrey. I guess it's realistic in terms of when a character like this does then fall in love, but they could have just done so much more with Max. Similarly, Aki didn't really do anything this season. If anything, he was just constantly following Audrey around, constantly following Max around. He had a little bit of his own storyline in terms of kissing somebody from the past, but other than that, Aki just didn't really do anything. Absolutely loved Kate Keller. I love the fact that, you know, she is the voice of Gossip Girl. She is the creator of it, and you can really see the power really getting to her head. But then underneath this, she is a nice character at the same time, and I thought it was really, really good when you partnered her up with Monet's mother, and you can really see the power dynamic. I loved it when Georgina was really bringing out the darker side of Kate Keller, as she did have the potential to be a ruthless Gossip Girl, but was just constantly in conflict, especially when you throw Jordan in the mix as well, who was always trying to bring Kate Keller to the nice side. And then speaking of Georgina Sparks, absolutely loved her inclusion in this storyline. In the beginning, I thought she was a little bit satire, and I thought it was really strange to see her as she was a bit of a shell of her former self. But then they very quickly brought back the evilness of the Georgina character, and just how much of a chaotic character she is, and how much chaos and carnage she is able to cause, which was absolutely brilliant. And it really did hark back to the original series in such a fantastic way. And if anything, like I said before as well, I would have loved to have seen more of Georgina. And if she was a regular on this series, I feel like from a characterization point of view, it could have been so much better. So I feel like if they had just removed Julian from not being the lead character anymore and put a couple of other characters into that lead position instead, I do feel like from a casting characters point of view, it would have been 10 million times better. So from a visuals perspective, I'm similarly a little bit mixed with this show. So first of all, I do feel like it does feel like a modern interpretation from the original show, and it is really, really cool to be back in the Constance world. So, you know, it does feel very familiar to the original series, but then at the same time, and you know, to their credit, I feel like they tried to make as best of a situation that they could have done in terms of they were filming during the COVID pandemic, so they couldn't have done loads of the extravagant type storylines that they did do in the original series in terms of going to really glamorous locations and loads of fun parties and all that sort of stuff. But I feel like from a parent's point of view, I feel like the parents had the best deal, as they were having so many billionaire type events and so many billionaire extravagant events, especially that party right at the end, which you could just feel how exclusive it was. And every single individual had a staff member dedicated just to them. So, you know, you could really feel the wealth and extravagance and exuberance, but I don't feel like it was as fun or as cool as the original was from a visuals perspective. So from a comparison perspective, speaking of the original, like I keep saying, I don't think this reboot, unfortunately, is as good as the original, which is just miles better. But a lot of high school based shows have been rebooted recently, and so I feel like this reboot is actually very similar to the Saved by the Bell one and the Bel Air one. Firstly, in terms of focusing on diversity, as well as focusing on lessons being learned over a lot of the fun situations that maybe the original people were getting up to. But what I do think is a really successful reboot is 90210, as I feel like the 90210 reboot is so much stronger than the original. So overall, with the second season of the Gossip Girl reboot, you know, it was watchable, but I was just expecting so much more from it. It just should have been so much more fun, so much more cool, so much more exuberant, so much more outrageous, and so much better than it ultimately was. And it just lost the mojo and the magic that the original show did. And I think it's really, really important to focus on diversity and to focus on lessons being learned. But first of all, you need to ensure that all of your characters and all of your storylines are really, really fun, and you're bringing back the audience and you are serving them with things that they want to see in terms of why they are watching this reboot, is because they want to see the brilliance of the original show just from a modern lens perspective. And unfortunately, I just think they lost their way a little bit with it. But you know, for all of those reasons, I'm going to give it a solid 5 out of 10. Now I'd love to hear what you thought of the second season of the Gossip Girl reboot, so let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. Otherwise, I look forward to seeing you in my next video.